we'll get started. Whilst I'm saying hello, please could you do the same and pop your name and where you're based in the chat box. It would be really great to hear where you're from, and it also feels like when we do this I'm not talking to myself for an hour. So if you could pop a quick hello in the chat and let me know your name and whereabouts you're from, that'd be really great. And whilst you're doing that, I'm just going to talk through what we're going to be doing today. So thank you again so much for joining us. It really is so lovely to see so many of you here with us today. I hope you're managing to enjoy the sunshine. I usually have my conservatory doors open to let some fresh air in, but where I am now, I'm in York, it's quite windy and it looks like it's going to rain, so I've had to shut them, which is probably a good thing because then I'm not going to get harassed by those really obnoxious flies. So, introductions. I'm Caroline and I'm a school development lead at English Mastery. So my role is essentially to support schools with their implementation journey virtually, and I get to visit schools in person as well, which is fantastic now. I've been working here since April last year, and prior to this, I taught another programme in my previous school. I'm going to talk to you about how we can perhaps avoid using PEE, PEA, PETAL and PETEZL, and how we can use different frameworks to teach analytical writing at sentence level. I'm going to speak about who English Mastery are in a second, but I'm just going to have a look at the chat now because I want to see all of your hellos. Oh, didn't mean to do that. Oh, hi Josie, hi Jane, hi Sue. Oh wow, we've got people up and down the country. That's brilliant. Oh wow, Devon. I hope it's sunny down there, Paula. Wow, I've got so many. Oh, Blackburn College. I used to live around there before I moved over to York. Hi, people in Blackburn College. It's brilliant. Oh, Southampton. Oh, another person. Elizabeth got another one from Devon, London. Oh, this is brilliant. Thank you so much as well for introducing yourselves and saying hi in the chat. It really does make the difference. Otherwise, I do feel like I'm just talking at my computer for an hour. So this is brilliant. We're going to be using this chat box quite a lot. So again, I don't feel like I'm talking to myself. If throughout the session you have any questions, if you pop them in the chat, my colleague Callum's going to keep an eye on all the questions that come through, and support me in making sure that I can answer as many as possible. We will have time at the end to answer any questions as well. So hopefully we won't miss any of the questions. So continuing on with our use of the chat box, can you tell me what the mnemonic PETEZL stands for? Now, when I first saw it, I think I got the second E wrong. So it'd be really interesting to know how many of you know what PETEZL stands for. PETEZL. So if you don't know, don't worry, you will be like me, or you can hazard a guess and put your answers in the chat box. While you're doing that, oh, it's just frozen. Oh, there we go. I'm just going to talk through the agenda. So we're going to be looking today at the perils of PEE and other frameworks and the dangers they lead to. We're going to look at the role of the curriculum in developing students' analytical writing ability, and we'll also think about how we can use models to develop students' understanding of what excellence really looks like. And at the end of the session, I'll take a few minutes to talk through the exciting opportunity to join our Education Research English Mastery Efficacy Trial, that was a mouthful, with the EEF. There will be time, as I said, to answer any of your questions, but please pop them in as we're going through, because otherwise they might pop out of your head. So as soon as you've got them, just pop them in the chat. So just a little bit about who we are. So we launched in Art Schools, which is a huge multi-academy trust, back in 2014, with schools in London, Birmingham, Portsmouth and Hastings. And the English Mastery programme was designed with a focus on designing and launching a complete English curriculum programme. So this would include the curriculum, the teaching resources, the professional development on offer, an implementation infrastructure and a complementary assessment framework. We currently have the privilege of working with around 200 schools across the country, and we absolutely love supporting the thousands of teachers and leaders this year. The Education Endowment Foundation ran a research trial back in 2019. It seems so long ago, doesn't it? It's like pre-COVID, which was unfortunately disrupted by COVID. but they did manage to write a report on that, and I'll share some of those insights with you shortly and talk through how and why they've decided to start a new research trial that we're currently recruiting for. So English Mastery is part of the ARC Curriculum Plus partnership, which has grown out of ARC. And our programmes are now used by over 600 schools and 15 multi-academy trusts in the country. We're a non-profit organisation, and we work with schools with English Mastery, Science Mastery. We have Maths Mastery secondary and primary, and we're recently piloting our Geography Mastery and our English Primary Mastery as well, to support schools across the whole of the UK. And this is our mission. Children and young people are at the centre of everything that we do. Our team of research involved curriculum designers and expert trainers are all former or current teachers who, like you, want to ensure success in English for all Key Stage 3 students, regardless of their starting places. I appreciate now more than ever, their starting places now are not where you would have expected them to start a couple of years ago. And today, the subject knowledge that we're going to really talk about is English with the focus on analytical writing, a subject that I think is incredibly important, and hopefully you all feel the same, which is why you're here. So we're going to crack on and look at the perils of PEE. I'd like to put forward that when we use those analytical writing mnemonics, those frameworks and scaffolds, etc., they can offer students a useful framework. When we resort to those generic guidances, we have the opportunity to cover all bases. It's a blanket approach. But when it comes to exploring literature in all of its diversity, all of its nuance and subtlety, that blanket approach can really shroud all that detail that makes our subject so rich and interesting and fascinating, which is why we all chose to teach it. The blanket approach really does risk assuming as well that we explore different types of literature like poetry, novels, non-fiction, speeches, that we explore them all in similar ways, or even different parts of the same text type in different ways. Writers throughout will play with language to be contradictory and to contradict themselves and to do similar things in different ways at different parts of the text. So then when we use those generic guidances, that blanket approach, we run the risk of obliterating all of that nuance that makes literature, that makes reading it so rich and engaging. A piece of commentary that really speaks to us at English Mastery is by Dylan William, a famous educationist who is perhaps most famous for his writing on assessment. In this, he's speaking about a piece of science teaching, but I think there are really huge parallels with what we see in English as well, with what I'm about to read you. I'm going to read this aloud in case you can't see it. I know some of you may have joined on your phone in your classroom, so bear with me as I read this aloud. I remember talking to a middle school student who was looking at the feedback his teacher had given him on a science assignment. The teacher had written, "You need to be more systematic in planning your scientific inquiries." I asked the student what that meant to him, and he said, "I don't know. If I knew how to be more systematic, I would have been more systematic the first time." This kind of feedback from the teacher is accurate. It's describing what needs to happen, but it's not helpful because the learner doesn't know how to use the feedback to improve. It's rather like telling an unsuccessful comedian, "You need to be funnier." It's accurate, but it's not helpful advice. And when I read this, it spoke to my experiences from teaching and from the experiences I've heard from other teachers. We may ask students to respond to our feedback in green, red, purple, rainbow, whatever colour your school uses, and our feedback might say something like, "Write more analytically," or "Explore your evidence in more detail." What I was writing is accurate, but it stands to reason that if they knew how to write more analytically or explore the evidence in more detail, they'd have done it. So chances are they just don't know how to do the thing that we're asking them to improve upon, not without explicit teaching of that skill. Some of you may be nodding. I can't see you because there's no cameras. We can't have cameras on the webinar. and seeing a similarity in the way that you currently or previously have been teaching analytical writing. And we can see that using generic tools can lead to those generic results, those generic outcomes of students where they really struggle to get into the nuance, the depth of what it is they're reading, because the tools that they're trying to chip away at those texts with, they're just not equipping them with that knowledge and skills to do so successfully. That isn't to say there is no place for these PEE structures. And I think that a really simple, really a quick win that we can undertake is to just shift the way that we use them. So if we move from the generic to the specific, we can actually support students in a more successful way. So you can see here on the screen an example of a common PETEL mnemonic: point, evidence, technique, analysis, link. And I see these in teaching, in displays, stuck in students' exercise books, and we can use that framework in principle. But if we shift it from the generic PETEL to be more specific to the specific context the students are exploring at that moment, we'll be able to support them in a much more powerful way. And it might look a little something like this. Now, if you're anything like me and you're marking lit paper 1 at the moment, you might be a little bit sick of Macbeth, but this is a really fantastic example of how to move from the generic to the specific. So as opposed to having that generic framework that students might struggle to find any purchase on, we can offer a much more specific set of probing questions, such as, instead of point, we could say, what does this scene tell us about how Macbeth's ambition has changed? What quotation best shows how determined Macbeth has become in his ambition? What does this quotation tell an audience about the nature of Macbeth's desire to become king? And how does Macbeth's ambition here compare to that of Lady Macbeth's earlier in the play? Now, as I'm reading these questions, I'm picturing all the essays I've just been marking on lit paper 1. And if you're doing the same, I hope that you're making some parallels there. But by offering these specific set of questions, we can probe students, and maybe they'll be more likely to write something with greater insight and greater detail and have greater success. It allows students to write more accurate and precise in their analysis as well. Now, you might be sat there on your own, or if you've joined together as a team, and you might be saying, well, that's still a straitjacket to students. Even though it's moving from generic to specific, but it's still a straitjacket to students. And it may well be that you're right. And this kind of structure may very well inhibit those that want to get those grades 8 and 9 at GCSE. But I'd also argue that moving from the generic to the specific, it's less inhibiting and less of a straitjacket than the PETEL paragraph, because we're getting them to think more specifically about what they're analysing. What I'd like to conclude with here, as generic tools such as PEE, PETAL, PETEZL, all of the generic tools there can lead to generic results. And one way to mitigate this is to personalize the framework for the context in which it's being applied, being specific with the current piece of analysis the students are currently undertaking in that moment. So that's some of the perils of PEE. And I'd like to talk now about the role of the curriculum and how that can play in thinking and developing students' analysis across a year and across a phase. So the chat is open. Again, I love using the chat. I did warn you, you're going to be doing a lot of typing. So I'm now going to invite you to write in the chat. List down as many components as you can think of that are needed for a successful piece of analytical writing. So when you're thinking about a piece of analytical writing, think about the different elements you're expecting to see there. I'm going to give you 60 seconds to write in as many as you can. It's 2 o'clock on a Monday afternoon, so I appreciate some of you may be a little bit sleepy, a little bit tired. It's coming to the end of summertime too. I'm sure you're all waiting and counting down for your summer holidays. So if you can just jot down as many elements as you can think of, that would be brilliant. So I'm going to give you 60 seconds. Wow, that chat's coming in thick and fast. I'm going to struggle to read through all these. Let's have a look. Yeah, definitely topic sentence, writer's purpose, methods. We try and scroll to the top to see some of the earlier ones. Yeah, looking at analysis at word level. Yeah, what, how, why. Oh, we've got a few what, how, whys. Balance of structural and linguistic aspects, definitely. Wow, Lucy, you've got loads there. Academic register, syntax, knowledge of the context, choice of quotation, detailed, personal and conceptualized response to the question. Great, exploring it as an essay, so you'd be looking at that thesis statement and interleaving that through. Wow, it looks like many of you don't have Monday afternoon brain at all. There are loads and loads coming in there. Writer's intention, thesis statement, personal response, I like that. Tone, definitely, Catherine, and I love the capitalization of that. Definitely. Yeah, clear argument, different layers of interpretation. Well, that is brilliant, and that is a lot when you're thinking about everything that they need to incorporate. So if any more pop to mind, pop them into the chat, definitely do that. There we go. So at English Mastery, here are some of the ideas that we had, and it's by all means not an exhaustive list. And even if we included everything from the chat, I still don't think it would be a fully comprehensive list of every single element that would be needed to incorporate into a really successful analytical essay. There's just so many. And I hope this illustrates just the breadth of different things we might be expecting students to grapple with, such as the discussion of characterization, the character arc, narrative structure, voice, exploration of form and convention, close textual analysis, including, that really fantastic tier 2 vocabulary, the writer's craft and intention, the context, the thesis statement developed throughout and seeing it interleaved through, alternative interpretations, topic sentences, embedded references, and looking at the academic writing, the form, the structure, the expression. And that list was quite exhausting. That list felt very long as I was reading through it. I had to take a breath. And it's not even an exhaustive, fully comprehensive list of everything that's needed to be included. And I hope you can see that this is an enormous amount of cognitive load to place on students when we're asking them to write analytically, whether that be in year 7, year 8, year 9 through to GCSE, and even moving into A-level. That is a lot of things that they need to be doing when we're just asking them to write analytically, which sounds really, I know it's not simple, but it can be quite seen as like a simple task, just write analytically about this question. But actually there's so much more going on underneath the surface there in terms of cognitive load. And that can result in students feeling incredibly overwhelmed when they're trying to write analytically. And as teachers, we can feel overwhelmed, and perhaps like the students aren't quite grasping what we're teaching them, and we can feel frustrated too that we're maybe writing the same feedback over and over again, be more analytical, explore it in more depth, etc. So we think the role of the curriculum, it's important to acknowledge and recognize that when we're trying to build those analytical writing habits with students, it might be foolish to try and do everything at once in year 7. It would place too much cognitive load on students. So what's the solution to this? So I'm going to talk you through the approach that we take here at English Mastery with the gradual layering of those analytical skills in our English Mastery Key Stage 3 3-year curriculum. The texts involved are our core curriculum texts. I'll just talk you through those, the texts and some of the skills that we deliberately practice throughout the unit. Again, it's not a comprehensive list of every single thing we look at within each unit, but it will give you a nice overview of how the curriculum supports with that gradual layering of those analytical skills. In year 7, we start with Oliver Twist. And we start by establishing what makes a successful topic sentence. So what makes it accurate, precise, because the topic sentence really just set the tone for the rest of the analytical paragraph. in A Midsummer Night's Dream, we'll move on to how to annotate a passage or text in detail, and how to select the very best quotation and embed these into our essay, and how to compose those extended analytical paragraphs. We then move on to look at how to do some close textual analysis, language analysis, exploration of the poetry form, and with a real focus on that figurative language with specific focus on metaphors. In Year 8, we move on to, we look at how to link paragraphs across an essay, so those subordinate clauses at the beginning, to give that sense of cohesion and begin to sow the seeds of that work on building a thesis and sustaining focus, which we look at in Year 9. In The Tempest, we'll look at the discipline of responding to a closed book examination and how to make those text references without having the play, the novel, or a planning sheet in front of them. And then in Animal Farm, we move onto the beginning to integrate that social historical context into an answer as well. Year 9, students start to become more mature in their analysis, so we look at how to introduce and sustain that thesis across the whole essay. And in Small Island, if you haven't read Small Island, I really recommend you do. There's a play and a book version. In here we look at the play version, but I'd really highly recommend adding Small Island to your reading list. So in Small Island, we'll look at how to analyse a text at macro level, including different cultural and critical interpretations of a text. And that final Year 9 unit, students then embark on, before their GCSEs, we look over critical comparisons between poems. This isn't to say that everything I've just spoken about should only be taught in the order that it states on the curriculum. That's not it at all. And those skills explicitly taught in later units can be taught earlier. So when we're thinking about that role of the curriculum, we can be really specific about how and when we're inviting students to develop those skills, so we don't overwhelm them with all the different types of analysis, all the different parts of that discipline at any one time. This just helps with focusing on explicitly teaching, and then the feedback that we're giving students in order to support them with their progression. So then they can, like I said before, about gradually layering those analytical skills. You might not be able to see this, it is a tad small on the screen, but you are able to go onto our English Mastery website, and there is a section on there where you can download some of our resources to have a look through, and the curriculum map is on there, so you can always have a look if you can't see it on the screen. Within the curriculum and within each unit, we're not just looking at explicitly teaching analytical writing skills on its own. We wouldn't get very far if that's all we were doing. We look at trying to teach students at that point in the curriculum. We're looking at teaching them the really fantastic Tier 2 vocabulary. We're looking at that powerful knowledge about the text we want students to be grappling with, different parts of speech and grammar that students really need to consider too. So when we think about the role of that quick macro level, it is really a part of a jigsaw, that we have to make sure we're thinking long term about that gradual acquisition of skill, of knowledge, so that students can be successful at each step of the way, so then they can really engage with analytical writing and feel successful within themselves. I'm just going to zoom on these two texts in Year 7. So in autumn term, we look at Oliver Twist, and in the spring term, we look at Shakespeare's Midsummer Night's Dream. These texts here in Year 7, we look at analytical writing, topic sentences, but it also needs to be gelled with students' understanding of the role of characterization of protagonists, antagonists, of vulnerable characters and exploitative characters too, as well as thinking about Dickens' moral and the role with Oliver Twist's character. All of this can be really complex for students to grapple with really early on in their high school career, which is why it's so important we think about the gradual layering of skills and really consider the student's cognitive load. So what does this look like in practice, and what are the ramifications when we're thinking about developing students and their writing over time. So I love this slide. Any excuse to show students work, I love it. And I'm just preparing for our upcoming Assessing for Mastery session, where all of our schools are invited to come along, they submit work, and we standardise together. And we're going to be standardising Year 7's final assessment, looking at unseen poetry. It's their final unit, and I absolutely love going through all the variety of pieces of Year 7 work from schools up down the country. It's a real pleasure to be able to share their work as well, like today. So this piece of work was only submitted by a school in December after they completed their Oliver Twist assessment. And I hope you'll agree, this is just an extract from their essay, that they've done a really fantastic job. The assessment question that they answered was, what type of character is Bill Sykes? And throughout this extract, we have some really, really fantastic things going on here, which I'm just going to point out. So we've got some great vocabulary, such as, we've got unforgiving, dehumanized, animalistic, manipulated, corrupted, volatile. The students are using some really fantastic, relevant vocabulary. And as I mentioned before, this is their first full analytical essay, because they won't have done anything like this in primary. And the student is composing as well a real balanced argument when they look at Bill's animalistic side, but we also see his humanity when he shows that regret and that remorse when he kills Nancy at the end of the text. Sorry if I've just spoiled Oliver Twist for anyone who hasn't read it or seen it or anything, but it has been around 150 years. It's not like I've ruined Harry Potter. There are some things that the student hasn't done. And we may be tempted to give students some feedback, saying things like, you haven't spoken about the writer's, Dickens' intention. You haven't discussed the contemporary reception of Sykes. And, in our society, the context of society was an influence of Sykes's character, and you haven't mentioned any of that. You haven't really done any thematic analysis. And it might be really tempting to offer some of these as their, even better ifs, their EBIs at this point with this student. But it's also important to acknowledge that those skills may not have been taught yet. And those might be those facets of the academic writing analysis that will have their moment in the sun. You're going to teach it. It will have their time to shine in the curriculum. It just hasn't been something that you've focused on within term 1 of Year 7 writing, with focusing on Oliver Twist. And as a department, you would need to agree when you're going to teach it. And this is a text upon which, you're going to hang those pieces of analysis on. So you need to really think about where you're going to put that gradual layering within your own curriculum to really support with students' cognitive load. And so, for example, that context we know, as I narrated earlier, will come in and will place a greater focus in that animal farm unit. So when we looked back and I talked through the bullet points and we looked at animal farm and how we're going to be looking at context there, we'll see discussion about the theme, and we'll see it more consistency in Year 9. That isn't to say that they shouldn't be invited to think about those concepts and themes earlier in Year 7 and 8. By all means, you can touch on them and you can teach them, but it's only to acknowledge that they will be really systematically taught those things later on, and that's not what they're trying to master at the moment. So when we're thinking about how to get better or more insightful analysis from students, we really can say the role of the curriculum has to play, a part in that sequencing of the curriculum about what's taught when and why. So the implication and the summary for this little section, departments should plan for that gradual acquisition of analytical skills throughout a student's career. Mapping out foci for each year, each term, or text can really help manage a student's their cognitive load and allow for more precise feedback to students that's going to help them develop and master their writing skills. And they can be much more granular in the ways that they're becoming more successful with their analytical writing. The curriculum, as well as having that macro impact on analysis, We can also see that play out week by week, day by day, and lesson by lesson, because not everyone has, we don't always have the control, do we, of our curriculum. So we can control what we do in our classrooms. So there are things that we can do lesson to lesson that will allow students to become more successful and more insightful with their analysis, without resorting to adding an extra letter to the PEE acronym. And the principle behind that is, if we think back to the Dylan William conversation earlier, when we looked at feedback, well, that analysis needs to be rooted in deep and rich knowledge of the text, so that we can invite students to play with that knowledge and develop that knowledge in ways that are interesting and meaningful, and to allow them to be more successful. And I'm going to give you an example in a minute. I'll narrate this with an example from the outside world of curriculum. And as I'm doing that, I just want you to think about the differences between practice and performance, and how that can, we're thinking about that, how that can benefit your students when thinking about developing that analytical writing. So I am completely football mad, a huge football fan. I have no choice. I have a football mad husband and 2 football mad children. So it was either be football mad or be an outsider in my own little family group. So my example, it just had to be football related. So I'm going to think about Harry Kane. So Harry doesn't practice for his football games by playing 90 minutes of 11-a-side football every day. Instead, he'll use carefully designed practice tasks that isolate a particular skill that he's working on and hone his performance on them. So if we think of all the different skills required to be an excellent footballer, they need to be able to accurately pass the ball. They need to use their strength against other players to maintain possession. They need to have quick footwork, explosive power, endurance, coordination. They need to have good decision making in split-second moments. If Kane were to exclusively practice 90-minute games, well, first off, he'd be exhausted if he was doing that every day. But more importantly, his coach's assessment, they'll always be general. They'll just tell him, be a better striker, Harry, you score more goals. It would be hard to isolate from a full 90-minute game what aspects of Harry's performance really requires more work for him to be able to be a better striker and score more goals. So, for example, they might focus on control when heading the ball, or building strength in the gym to make sure he can tackle and maintain that possession on the ball. His practice will look different to playing a football game, but that practice it's so important when you're thinking about improving and becoming better at something. Within the practice, the feedback that Harry would get from his coaches would be so specific, because it would be isolating a skill that needs developing and then allowing Harry Kane that time to give appropriate time to develop and really focus on it. So with Harry, the practice takes a completely different form. So when thinking about, for example, heading the ball, in order to head the ball, sorry if none of you are football fans, but in order to head the ball, Harry needs to be able to get in the air. He needs to be able to be the one that gets his head on it. Now, in order to get into the air, he needs to be able to jump quite high. Now, to be able to jump quite high, I'm assuming Harry might have to work on strength in his legs, and he'll have to focus maybe doing some leg weights or leg workouts to get that muscle, to get that strength. And then he'll have to practice jumping. That looks nothing like a 90-minute game, but without focusing on getting in the air to get the ball first, he's not going to be able to score many headers, because he won't get the ball on his head. Similarly with, a position within the box in front of the goal, he needs to think about where he's going to position himself, how he's going to, position the defenders in front of him to give him access. So all that thinking looks very different to playing a 90-minute game, but without it, he's not going to become a better striker. He's not going to score more goals, and he's not going to, beat the Premier League goal scoring. He's not going to break that record without doing all of this type of work. So when we're thinking about, analytical writing, it isn't always helpful to practice being better writers by doing loads of analytical writing, there are other elements of practice that we can invite students to take to divert that frequency and to really develop that rich, that deep, interesting knowledge as well. So here are some examples from the English Mastery curriculum. I'm going to explain this a little bit because I think it's a little bit out there with insult bogey tennis. You might not have used it before. So this is an example from our Year 7 A Midsummer Night's Dream lesson. For those of you who haven't read A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's a Shakespearean comedy where a love potion, it creates chaos, conflict, carnage between 4 young Athenians. There's loads more going on than that. That is a really simplified summary of the play, but that's the plot line I'm going to focus on here because that's what we're going to be looking at. 2 of the female characters, Hermia and Helena, they are best friends, but because of the love potion, it has caused one of the male Athenians' love to switch, and they have a huge row. In the lesson, we would invite students to take a more dramatic approach to the passage, where they'd well, they're having a big argument where they would, they'd have to escalate their expressions and their voice and their speech, and think about their body language and that dramatic presentation of the fight. It's a verbal fight. I'm just going to put that there. I'm not having kids with swords, and it's something that we know teachers and students really enjoy doing. It's so much fun in the classroom, but it's not enjoyment for enjoyment's sake, just to get it on its feet. Actually, there's an important principle at work here, because we need to understand that A Midsummer Night's Dream, it's a comedy, and we don't always get that through reading the extracts. We'll constantly tell the students it's a comedy, and this is supposed to be funny, but getting them to enact it and dramatize it and be in it, it really allows them to have a laugh. And one of the ways in which that comedy is created is by the fact that they get to shout and scream these ridiculous insults at each other, and it's absolutely outrageous. So the practice we see here of students enacting that drama, enacting that comedy, it doesn't look like writing an analytical paragraph, but that practice is going to support your class in thinking more and being able to write more insightful in their analysis later on, because they have that understanding. They've been in it now, that that role of drama, the role of that performance, and establishing that it's a comedy, and we can really look at that, the form of the play through this. Similarly, here's a different activity. It's still on A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm going to keep with the same unit. We explore the ending of the play here, and one of the characters remains under the impression of the love potion. So we can establish a debate here with students. Is it a happy ending because at the end of the play everyone seems happy, there's no more conflict, it's all been resolved, everyone loves each other, there's no unrequited love? Or does the end of the play actually undermine the notion of true love? We see that the character of Demetrius is in love with Helena, but only because he's left under the influence of the love potion. When you think about it, it's actually a really cynical ending to the play, because Shakespeare undermines that notion of free will and true love. And debating about which of these statements you agree with the most allows students to develop and express that argument. And here they're debating the pros and cons of the 2 statements on the screen. And again, this will look nothing like analytical, no analytical paragraphs, no analytical writing. But what this exercise allows the students to do is to formulate an idea, to put it into words without pushing it through that funnel of a PEE paragraph. And it really allows some more interesting and open ways of reflecting on a text, but without funneling it through. So we're really getting to look at the nuances of the play. Final example. One of the questions we pose to students is whether the love potion is good or bad. We can just invite students here to compose that in a table, bullet points, and tell me the reasons why it's good, why it's bad. It's good because the lovers are happy. There's, it brought loads amount of comedy and humor, and it was actually really funny. It's a great dramatic device. You can look at the negativity of it because, you know, of all the conflict and it creates, and you can have those discussions about free will and true love. And again, just composing some bullet point list in a table doesn't look like the final performance of an essay, but we can, by inviting students to undertake this kind of activity, we're supporting them to be more successful in that analytical writing and composing their own thoughts and ideas and their own argument about it. So to draw this section together, practice can and should take different forms to the performance. An understanding of the composite parts of the skill being rehearsed, perhaps it will allow students to develop the different knowledge that they need. In other words, we can get students to be more analytical by doing things that don't look like an analytical essay. Similarly with Harry Kane and his performance and practice looking very, very different, but having a real positive impact on that final performance. So the final thing I'd like to speak to you about with regards to developing students' analytical writing is the role that modelling can have in developing what students understand what excellence might look like. I'm sure you're familiar with Rosenshine's paper, Principles of Instruction, as a piece of education research. One of the key principles of instruction that Rosenshine details is the importance of providing models to students. You know, models and worked examples can help students to solve problems faster. There is a huge number of ways in which providing models or developing models can benefit your teaching as well as your students. And these are just a few, and I'm just going to go through a few again. It's not an exhaustive, comprehensive list, otherwise we'll be here till 5 o'clock. But this is just to exemplify this for you in just this moment. So it allows you to clarify what your expectations are of students. I remember when I was teaching, I'd do a bit of reading and then set students off on a task to complete an analytical writing paragraph. And I'd wonder why, either during the lesson or afterwards when I was marking, why they were struggling with the analysis. It was only when I sat down myself that I realised that I hadn't set the task up in a way that allowed them to succeed. So by completing the model myself, it gave me that deeper understanding, not just the task that I was trying to get students to engage with, but also the text itself. And it really forced me to think about, you know, where the cognitive load was being placed and to really preempt any misconceptions from the text or the writing itself. And by giving students this real example, it doesn't have to be an excellent one. You can give a non-example as well as an excellent example. You can have one where you work through it together, and you can also have, you know, present students with a model of excellence, and that will provide them with, you know, something to strive towards, as well as giving them that solid understanding of how to write analytically, so they can, you know, understand and follow they can follow models more clearly, compared with a success criteria like a mark scheme. And if you're confident enough, writing these in front of students and narrating your thought process can be really beneficial in developing those metacognitive approaches. These models you can create can also be really easily turned into scaffolding aids as well, to support students with developing their writing, or where you as a teacher want to place that cognitive load. So for example, you might want to focus the lesson on, you know, really getting that in-depth analysis. So instead of asking students to write their own topic, sentence and quotation, you might hand that to them already pre-populated, and they then just spend the time on really focusing and crafting their analysis. Now, I'm just going to go a little bit off piece here, but at the start of my career, I'll be perfectly honest, I didn't feel comfortable writing my own models and sharing them. It was something that I just wasn't confident with it to begin with. But I started doing them myself because I saw people doing it in lessons. I was like, oh, I'm going to give it a go. And I kept them to myself for a while, but even by keeping them to myself, it still gave me huge insight into the lesson, into the activity, into the misconceptions and that cognitive load. And it really helped develop my teaching. So if that is you, please keep giving it a go and keep doing it. The benefits really outweigh the negatives, and you don't need to show your models to anyone until you're ready. So just completing them for yourself to start with will give you a lot of information and support you with your teaching. So yeah, if anyone like me when I first started, give it a go. Your confidence will build the more that you do it. So here's an example of a teacher that we worked with at English Mastery who wrote their own response to the assessment task for A Midsummer Night's Dream. I'm not going to make you read it, and I'm not going to read it aloud to you, don't worry. But this teacher really enjoyed composing the essay. They enjoyed grasping with it, and they composed it at teacher level, not at year 7 student level, as they wanted to think deeply and really carefully about the task. And then this allowed them to do that when you're looking through your response, you can unpick it and you can see how you can use this in your classroom, or how you can use this when you're planning for your students. And it really pulled out a few really important things that then influenced his teaching in the classroom that year. It allowed the teacher to see that above all else, the love potion was, it was a dramatic device, something that Shakespeare is deploying deliberately. And this necessarily wasn't something that this teacher looked at before. They looked more at, single word level analysis rather than looking at the love potion as a dramatic device. And we also see status is really crucial in establishing, that comedy. Think about the fairy queen. Absolutely fallen in love with a lowly man with a donkey's head. And I mean, she doesn't just go on stage going, oh, I love you. It is really hyperbolic. It's really exaggerated love about how she feels about this man that, is with a donkey's head and is a lowly village man. And, she really goes to town in saying how perfect and wonderful she thinks he is, and how beautiful and wise. And it's, having that status there makes it even more comedic, because they're on completely different levels. And then it becomes even more funny when bottom goes, yeah, do you know what, I'm buying into this here, it's brilliant. And you can really see that role of the comedic form coming through. And by completing this model, it allowed the teacher to do several things. One, it allowed them to think deeply about how they were going to teach the play. They could draw on this when they're thinking about misconceptions and how they're going to plan to address these. And it gave them a really great model of excellence to show students, and it gave them a fantastic start to creating scaffolding for students to use, which I'm going to show you how he did that here. There we go. So all this teacher did was adapt some of the sentences, and he used that as sentence stems for their students. So by taking 10-15 minutes to compose your own model of the end of unit assessment, you as a teacher then can just strip out some of the content depending on the need of your class, of your students, and depending what your focus is that lesson. And it just gives them some really focused sentence stems to allow them to really compose with great accuracy and precision and accuracy. And you can even then remove this even further and get students afterwards to compose these sentence stems themselves, thinking think, pair, share. And having that model in advance really did support the teacher in that moment in developing the class's analytical writing. So just to finalize here, modeling live or composing beforehand, honestly, if you haven't already, give it a go. It offers so many more benefits than negatives. And as I've said, you don't need to show it to anyone until you're ready. Teacher or student models. So at English Mastery, we have a standardization booklet, and lots of schools use paragraphs from that to show students as well. They're really good and useful for planning, instruction and assessment, and you should use these liberally. Make the most of them while you've got them. So I'm just going to take a sip of my brew. Won't be a second. Just lukewarm, so it's not quite at the cold moment yet. So that draws to a close the session of Perils of PEE, PEAL and PETEZL. And I've just remembered I haven't told you what PETEZL means, so I'm just going to have a look in the chat and see if anyone got that right. Hang on, just scroll up. We really have used the chat today, it's fantastic. So it is point, evidence, technique, exploration, zoom and link. Yeah, so I got the second E wrong. I didn't think it was exploration, but there it is. So well done if you got it right. I sincerely hope you're not quickly scribbling down what the acronym means, ready to use in your next lesson tomorrow. And instead, I hope that throughout the session we've gone through, it's allowed you to reflect a bit on, about how to carefully perhaps use those models and how those frameworks, how they may or may not be suitable to use. I'm just going to have a look, see if there's any questions in the chat, and then I'm just going to talk to you about English mastery. It's such a shame that some of you have to leave. Thank you for attending. Okay. So in terms of English mastery, just going to speak to you now about a project that we're currently recruiting in partnership with the Education Endowment Foundation, the EEF. So we're inviting schools to join the English Mastery Programme to embark upon an education research trial. We're a complete curriculum. We have the curriculum progression and framework. We have the lesson guides and all the resources needed. We have a really comprehensive training and development. We don't just give you the resources, give you the thumbs up and say good luck. We really support you, your team, your leaders, your teachers in developing and implementing English mastery to work in your context. We don't have an agenda. We work with you to support implementation in your school. And we also have a bank of assessment materials that complement our curriculum. So I mentioned earlier about the standardisation sessions we run termly to moderate and assess students' work across the English mastery community. And as part of the assessment materials, we all come together 3 times throughout the year to standardise and moderate our key stage 3 work. So it gives you a real sense of how your students are developing unit to unit and year to year. And it's also brilliant because we all come together and we share insights into the units as well to support as a community. I mentioned earlier that we launched back in 2014 and we had a trial that was unfortunately interrupted with COVID. But despite all of that, the EEF was still able to publish a report into their findings and into the impact the English mastery had on teachers. And the findings of that report are really insightful. So I'm just going to show you some really quick headlines. So this is an independent evaluation, by the way. It's not like when you see those things on Facebook where it's like, I don't know, 8 out of 10 women said, it made their skin softer. I don't know. This is an independent evaluation conducted by an external evaluator. And these are the findings that they found. And some of the statistics are really compelling. And it's a fantastic read if you've ever got time to look through it. So the percentage of, 75% of teachers felt that English mastery improved students overall, 74% felt it improved their grammar skills, 63% their reading skills, and 68% their writing skills, which is really high statistics. And a quotation from a teacher says, keywords that they build on: corrupt, naive, malicious, and we saw some of that in that Year 7 December Oliver Twist essay. We've seen students retain that from Year 7, which has been, an amazing, because you can see, obviously, that's the impact of that retrieval and interleaving and really thinking about that gradual layering as well that we were thinking about. 89% of teachers thought that literary heritage strand was quite or very effective, and the same with writing mastery at 73%. I'm just going to skip through that. I'm going to come to this one because I'm aware of time. So in the middle of a wellbeing crisis, this is the one that we're most proud of. This is the one that is the most heartwarming. We know that English, we love it all so much, but our marking workload just seems so much more compared to all the other subjects. I once sat and watched someone in maths mark a full class set of books in less than 30 minutes. and it's sometimes not fair. But English mastery, 80% of teachers felt that English mastery actually supported teachers in reducing their planning and marking workload. And it allowed them actually to, instead of creating all of these resources, it allowed teachers to actually think about how they're going to teach it, rather than, you know, thinking about how they're going to create the content. They're thinking about how we're going to deliver it, and the ability to think about it as a teacher, you know, it's really liberating and a far better use of your time. So we are currently inviting schools to apply to join us on a randomized control trial. So I'm just going to randomized control trial. You're placed into one of two groups. The first group you might be randomly selected into is where you will receive all of the English mastery components that I've just talked through. You'll receive all the curriculum, the support, the assessment, the training, everything. And we ask that you implement it with at least your year 7 starting in September coming up, and then you roll that in with them into year 8. However, you do receive our full 3-year curriculum, so you can implement as much as you like. You can flood your curriculum if that's what you would like to do. The EF are heavily subsidising this, so normally the cost is north of £7,500, but the EF are paying over 80% of this. So we ask that you pay £900 in the first year and £900 in the second year to access all of these amazing resources. Group 2, the control group. Half of the schools will be randomly allocated to the control group, and they don't receive the programme. You continue as normal. And to say thank you, when you've completed the data requirements, you will receive £1,250 to spend on glue sticks, post-it notes, highlighters, books, whatever your department is currently running around trying to find. Now, there are terms and conditions with the trial. To take part, you must be an English state school, non-selective, have a year 7 cohort starting in September and a year 8 the following year. So I know some middle schools stop at year 7, so unfortunately they wouldn't be eligible. You can't have delivered English mastery in the past, and unfortunately special schools and pupil referral units are not eligible to participate in the trial.